when you're proposing a geographic model, you're going to be subject to review. I would expect anything I do, any of these books, I expect to be picked over and carefully. And if I can't really support it, then I need to change my position on it, right?
Right. Mormonism with the Murph, where Larry Singh explores church history and the church's truth claims. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, Mormonism with the Murph, where Larry Singh explores the church's history and the church's truth claims. So this is part 2 of my interview with geologist Jerry Grover. Go back and watch part 1 if you haven't, where we talk about the Book of Mormon and comparing geology and the Book of Mormon, and specifically John Sorensen's Mesoamerican model, and what we know about volcanic eruptions and earthquakes and the geology in that geographical area, and how this correlates with the descriptions of the destruction in 3rd Nephi and other places in the Book of Mormon as well. And it was a really in-depth analysis and research that Jerry did. In this part, we're going to be continuing and sort of comparing geology with the Heartland Geographical Model, and also just some other scientific elements as well. We're going to talk a little about Zelph. You have a few slides on that. So we're going to, pick up from where we left off. So let's, we'll get up your slides and let's talk about geology and does this support or does it pose any problems for the Heartland Geography Model?
So let's pop through. Okay. So when I wrote the geology book, I had one chapter at the end where I talked a little bit about a few of the other variant models, one in Mesoamerica and then the Baja. I kind of commented I didn't really discuss this particular model, number one, because I kind of determined that a volcano really was the best fit. And the Heartland model in the United States does not have a volcano. Mm-hmm. So that's, one geologic parameter. Now, again, I'm not saying people do their own models, right? So they come up with their own creative ways of interpreting the text or whatever they want to do. But so it's possible. So kind of they're saying, well, they have, as I go through their descriptions, and again, their model is not like Sorensen in the sense that it's as developed. So you have some maps, but they don't have as many specific cities. They don't really give a discussion of like all the details of up and down. And so there's kind of general cultural things. And so you kind of have, and there's a couple different books. Sorensen had it all together, in 2 big books, and you could kind of go through exactly at longitude, latitude, where things are at.
The topography is very consistent between like Nephi and Zarahemla. And I remember Brand talked about like when some of the people, I think it was around time of Mosiah, maybe, when they traveled on the River Sidon, but they must have taken the wrong river and end up in like the land of desolation. And he said like all those wee details, which are very specific, work under that geographical model.
Mm-hmm. I disagree with him some on that, but that's okay.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, it actually works better under the way I look at it. So,
okay.
Because actually there's a paleo channel that they don't consider that was existent at the river that was existent at the time of the Book of Mormon that people don't know about. So again, I've done a hydrological analysis of the area, the ancient paleo channels and stuff. So
right. Okay.
Yeah, anyway, we don't have to get into that, but
no.
So essentially, I'm doing the best I can. I mean, these are kind of maps showing the general, and I'll show some other ones. They're variations, right? Different people. It's like the Heartland. It's not like Sorensen model. They kind of have Wayne May and a few others. Wayne May basically has told me personally, because I was looking for his maps or whatever. He says, I don't identify any cities, just Cumorah and, well, Zarahemla. He believes that Zarahemla is on the other side of Nauvoo. And so, so it's kind of like you have different people proposing Meldrum. So you have Rob Meldrum, and Wayne May isn't always consistent, even though they present at the same conferences and things. So there's variations, I think, within the Heartland group. Jonathan Neville kind of just says Cumorah only, and then he's thinking Tennessee or something. If you talk to him, again, he doesn't have a map, but so it's not quite essentially in Mesoamerica, you kind of have two main models. And there's somebody that kind of has a little different model, Richard Hout, that has it further to the east, but most of them agree. By the way, did you pick up a beep on my mic or?
No, I
Okay,
think you're
sorry.
fine.
Yeah, there's a beep of our fire system going on in the background. So,
Oh no, you're grand.
okay, so you can edit that out, I guess. But
Oh, it's okay. I can edit that out.
So essentially, and so they're very defined models, and so it's fairly simple. They all agree land of Nephi. Most of them, they all agree land northward generally. So most of the variations are small permutations. Where in these models, because there's not an obvious narrow neck, right?
Right.
And so they get all kinds of different permutations, and so it's kind of hard to really do a full geological analysis, and I haven't. But primarily, and they kind of use what I'm going to talk about is really so just the third Nephi. So we're not going to talk about the city locations or anything. We're just really, when you talk about the third Nephi, I mean, you have to have, I'm basically limiting it to say whatever you do, you have to have severe damage in the north and also mist of darkness in the south. So I'm just applying only the general third Nephi parameters that we talked about in part one, not this city matches this or this city matches that. Does that make sense what I'm saying? So
Yeah, it makes sense.
because I don't really have, there's just too much variation of what people are saying. And so
I wasn't aware of that. So yeah, they don't have a consistent geography or agreeing on what cities where.
well, like
model.
like Rod Meldrum does have a one, and I'll show you that one. And he agrees with the Wayne Mays. It's just, but they're, this I agree on Hamlin, but it's a lot. It's, and so Rod Meldrum
some slight variations between them.
Yeah, Rod Meldrum he's kind of the main promoter, of the Firm Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other people that have, Heartland models that some just have, it in Delaware or something. So, and you'd say, and part of the issue is it's like a lot of them, most of them don't have really a high level of scientific, like Sorensen go into all kinds of details, right? Okay, here's the Maya culture, here's the things, here's the writing. I mean, so you don't really have a ton of underlying, you kind of have just generic, you have the Hopewell culture, the Adena culture, but you don't really get into, the who are really the Lamanites, because you have this Hopewell. Well, who are Nephites? They don't differentiate them culturally, right? They just are kind of all part of the same culture. So there's just not as much fine tuning, I suppose, or detail. Maybe they can't, maybe they don't have enough information to do anything with it. But
so I remember Brand just noted to me when we discussed, the Heartland model. He, they didn't have writing up in North America, and they didn't have kings. So a couple of things that existed in Mesoamerica that didn't in Heartland.
Yeah, and see, my attempt is not. I obviously do most of my research in Mesoamerica because that's kind of, like I said, there's like the characters document has a clear bar.9 in it, a Mesoamerican number. So there's other things that would cause you to just looking on its face. And I did look at the geology here. And when I did my geology book, my goal was not to look at every model, but I did. What happened is I sent my book out for review. And then everybody wanted me to do a geological review of their model.
Right.
Their model. I'm like, it took me 2 years to do this one. I don't have, the rest of my life to look at every crazy model out there, because there are a bunch of them. So I just I looked at Baja, just said, listen, there's not a volcano there that was active during the proper time frame. And that actual model is somewhat developed, at least comparable to Heartland. So, but the Heartland one, I just didn't really consider because there wasn't a volcano at all, right? Baja had some volcanoes, they just didn't erupt in the right time frame. And so, again, because Rod Meldrum kind of went on some podcast last week and kind of went after my material, just saying, "Hey, I only looked at Mesoamerica." It's like, well, I did. I didn't really get any further with the Heartland because there's no volcano and it just didn't seem to match. But I'm willing to, and so I'm looking at okay, so they are saying that they can explain their model without a volcano. So I looked at that, right?
Right.
And that's a very, very brief, because you kind of run into problems right off the bat. Meaning, you don't need to go to city models. So we'll start talking about it. But this is kind of one map. The primary issue I'm going to look at is really the method of destruction of third Nephite being in the right places under these models. So, like I mentioned, they say no volcano, so they've got to rely on other hazards to create all the listed effects that we gave in part one of this podcast, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are other things they could come up with: local storms, tornadoes, forest fire. I don't think that's really feasible. You got to generate it within 3 hours. You have to have mist covering everything with vapor of darkness, land southward. And so some of the things that they talk about, I don't think are difficult. And that's where they do have the new Madrid fault, and we'll talk about that as their earthquake source. The vapor mist of darkness, it just fundamentally, there's really not any good explanation that they've come up with. They use kind of the anecdotal accounts of the 1811 New Madrid fault. They use this book. I don't know if it's going to show in reverse or right, but which is done by a geologist and geophysicist, but it's more anecdotal type things. So they're saying, oh, there somebody in their house smelled vapors, smelled like rotten egg gas, something like that. I mentioned that. They just basically, but it's just a local effect of releasing from like a riverbed stuff where you have kind of rotten egg smell kind of thing from the earthquake. So the problem that they have is they don't, a lot of the things that they're talking about, like earthquake fog, is really just a local effect proximate on the fault. And and it's very short duration. It doesn't go for 3 days.
So it wouldn't be 3 days, and it wouldn't be covering, because in the Heartland Geography Model, you showed that it would cover up to like the lands more northward, and also
they have a huge area, to cover. And so under that particular map, it has land and Nephi clear down to the Gulf. Not every map will show that, and I'll show some others, so, but they still have kind of similar problems. So the problem is they can't, I don't find a good a good explanation for the vapor mist of darkness,
because they're arguing it's sort of like an earthquake fog, and you said that that'll be very
they basically say there's sand blows, which sand blows are when there's like kind of loose sand formation not that far from the surface, that the compaction of the earthquake can cause this kind of geyser of sand to shoot out. And that occurs, but it's short duration. It's only proximate. It's only right next to the fault. I mean, pretty close to the fault. So yes, it does create some dust, but not very much, not very far, and it's not very long. And the smog they're talking about is really condensate. It's just fog. When you have saturated soils like near a river or something, and it gets hit. It doesn't occur at every earthquake. Very few earthquakes have them, but you can get a little bit of like mist, if you want to call it, a little fog, kind of condensate coming up, like an early morning fog or something like that. And it can sit in a valley or something where where the wind's not blowing, which, that's the other problem. It talks about tornadoes, all these other things. It's like, well, some of the things you're depending on, like sand blow, is like, if that's going to work, it's not, if you've got wind blowing, it's going to blow it away. It's meaning the Baja had the same problem. They basically said, well, this big hurricane came in, and then there was quiescent fog just sat there. And I'm like, well, there's no meteorological condition. You can't have a hurricane come through with 200-mile-an-hour winds, and then it goes to nothing.
Right.
I mean, you just don't have that naturalistically. That's not. They've tried to give an explanation, but it just doesn't really fit. It's kind of what I'm saying. That's a problem. Now, if you can come up with some other solution, great. But I'm just reviewing what they've got. So in this situation, what they're saying, again, they don't give you mists of darkness with any kind of extent.
Right.
And again, we'll show you where the new Madrid fault is, so you can kind of see that.
And would they just chalk up the lightnings and sharp lightnings to just storms?
Right. Yeah, a storm, which again, it's kind of like, yes, you can have a storm. Yes, you can, but you're going from the general. That's what I'm getting away from, is like, we need to, you can't just take these general things. You have to apply them to your model. So if you're saying that there was a storm covered all of the eastern United States, you need to show me where that's ever happened, because hurricanes don't do that. Even those are huge, they just have a path and then they dissipate. And it's got to be able to, and so they say, well, there's tornadoes in the Midwest. Okay, there is, but do they occur during the right time of year? Typically not.
And would it be likely for all those things to happen together? Like,
and again, that's where you get
earthquake.
And I think that's part of the issue is maybe I'm too naturalistic for them, meaning they want to say, well, God could do whatever he wants. I'm like, well, he can.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. But that doesn't really, that's just kind of defeating the whole purpose of creating a geographic model,
Right. So, looking for evidence to support.
Right. And so that's kind of what is that, again, I think the biggest, and maybe somebody could come up with another Eastern states model that is more compact or something, or, but again, I only have to work with, I'm not going to go in there and like try to figure out if their model works and recreate and help them. It's just, I don't think it took place there. Number one, they say, well, you're biased. It's like, well, that's not because I'm biased. It's just because that's where my scientific investigations have directed me. Is I've ended up in Mesoamerica because that's where things are working, right? And also some of them have said, even on podcasts, well, we used to be Mesoamerican guys, and then we went. It's like,
so we were open-minded, then we moved.
Yeah, we looked at and we looked at the Maya, and they weren't it. It was like, well, they didn't look, because Sorensen never said the Maya were the Nephites. He said the opposite. So those are the Lamanites. There's a cultural boundary. Those are Lamanites, not Nephites. So even the comments that a lot of them make, I'm like, I don't think you really investigated it like you say. But that doesn't mean.
And not to beat up on the Heartlanders, but what Brant said to me as well is that a lot of these people who are promoting it aren't trained scholars in that area, and that doesn't mean that
I don't mind.
Somebody could be not a scholar and might have good evidence and good arguments, but it might be also another reason to be more cautious if a lot of the more credible scholars are leaning more towards Mesoamerica.
And I don't really have that parameter, meaning I'm kind of like, you could come, like Dan Peterson said, you could find something carved on the back of a watermelon, you find it. If it's a good idea, it's a good idea or something. I'm just saying, I don't mind. I don't care about like appeal to authority, right? I don't care if
right. Yeah, because that's a fallacy as well.
Yeah, I just care about the argument, the data. That's what I look for, is the data. And when I look at the model, how specific is it and does it work? And so I am not saying that people aren't faithful LDI. They aren't trying, they are. And a lot of them are good people. A lot of them I know very well and don't have any problem. They get the shirt off their backs and help you out, kind of thing. Great Christians. So that's not an issue. It's just when you're proposing a geographic model, you're going to be subject to review. I would expect anything I do, any of these books, I expect to be picked over and carefully. And if I can't really support it, then I need to change my position on it. Right. If the facts are different. Right. And that's going to happen anyway, as in something like this, you have science and then, archaeology finds something totally new, you have to accommodate it, right? Or look at it. Sure. So that's my approach. So when I'm looking at their model, it's maybe they can come up with something better, but I'm just saying what they have out right now does not meet the geologic parameters that as a geologist, I see in the Book of Mormon, the tech, and so we'll go kind of move forward there.
Yep.
Based off that. Now, the other thing is in our first part one, we talked about these different levels of damage, right? These Mercalli, they have a kind of a different, they're similar. They're mostly similar to Mercalli. The New Madrid USGS uses slightly different, but they're pretty much the same. And you have a couple different there's a few geologists who come up with a little different permutations of this, but as you can see, when we talked about, you've got to have at least a level 7 to really get the damage that we're talking about in the Book of Mormon, right?
Mm-hmm.
For the collapse of structures and all that. As you can see, that's
That
the
would be
yellow.
yellow.
Yep, that's the yellow. So you got, here's the New Madrid fault. And so that's the problem is, level 5 is the blues. Now there are other lower levels, and we'll show another map of that. But, there's a few things up here, but there's no evidence that those really had any, quakes at the time, but they're still very small. So the problem is you're going to have your land northward and land southward in this proximity, right? To maybe
Because they have it further up north, don't they? Like more in the
yeah. Well, this map, and we'll show other ones. So they have land of desolation. These are different ones. So, and we'll see other ones that are maybe a little more. But you have land of desolation here, Zarahemla over here, Bountiful, land of Nephi down here. So you're really like looking in this area. So in your narrow neck somewhere up, and that's kind of a trick too. Is I can never figure out. They got Cumorah, and it's hard to. The narrow neck is a tricky one because you got to have Cumorah in the land northward, right?
Mm-hmm.
You got land of desolation. We know Cumorah was in the land of desolation because that's where the Jaredites were destroyed, right? That's a definition of desolation.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Those are other problems with the model that aren't really geologically related. But
so are you saying that this earthquake here wouldn't have reached up to like definitely not the land northward on
right
Heartland model?
Yeah, and or any of the other, meaning a lot of them have like Zarahemla. I mean, they're so far away. Even
it's almost like the rest of it.
Right, that's the extent of the New Madrid fault. It's right there. It has powerful earthquakes, and I'm not saying the New Madrid isn't a one that can generate powerful earthquakes. It can. They tend to cite in their information. It's like, there were some bells tolled up in the eastern United States that rang some bells. Well, of course, and that's getting down to your level 1 and level 2. So you have some extent. Ringing a bell, meaning a pendulum that is in free, has no friction. It's not hard to ring. It's not hard to get a pendulum to swing. In fact, it'll swing for a long time if you don't try to stop it. So what I'm saying is kind of the examples they're using are not, those are not shaking intensities that are very high. And they're clearly not destructive, so no. So that's kind of where you start to run into problems, and that's kind of why I'm saying I don't go too much further.
And is that the earthquake zone they tend to point to?
That is the one. That's the only one that's what they rely on for the earthquake.
And it doesn't overlap with their main geography.
Only parts of it, right?
Only parts. Oh,
yeah, that's the problem. That so let's open this other.
So it's not only that they don't have a volcano, but also that
the earthquake doesn't work. The fault system. It would work if somebody redid the model and showed it they could do this model much smaller. I'm not saying it could work even then in terms of the mist of darkness. Who knows what they draw, but you have to have destruction in the land northward. I don't know how you get destruction in the land northward. Most of the destruction in the land northward,
because the earthquake wouldn't have reached up there.
Yeah, so you're going to have to move your whole model clear to the south and have like land of Nephi in Florida or something. I don't know.
But then that would impact like where the Hill Cumorah being in New York and
those are, and like I said, that's why I'm not going to. My job, I've never considered my job as analyzing geological parameters is to redo the models for them.
Right, okay. Right, yeah.
Like the Sorensen, I looked at it, I says, hey, actually, that worked. And not only that, if it falls in, there's other cities we can identify, maybe help the Sorensen. I'm willing to do that. But this one, it's like, if it's not, it's their job to actually get something that complies with the geologic parameters of the Book of Mormon. Not job, meaning, and maybe they have some proposal they could make, or, again, they just say, a lot of it's just from heard. I've just got comments back. You're just a Mesoamerican, part of the Mesoamerican cabal or whatever they call it. And I'm like, I don't even know the people you're talking about. I just do my own research.
But you're not coming from this angle where like you you have necessarily a bias towards Mesoamerican. You're trying to go after the Heartlanders, but you're presenting the
No,
geology. You're a
I even
geologist.
presented like a Zelph thing at their conference. I don't have any problem with them, you know. And I don't. Again, I've ran into kind of the buzzsaw of some of them when I first started. Again, and probably Mesoamerican people have the same kind of. Some people view it as just like I said. I've had members think that I'm you know, even looking at the characters is like, so are you a prophet? You know, how do you know? Where's your Urim? You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, no, I'm not saying that. I'm just looking at it. You know, so I get criticized from all sides if I look at anything. So it's like, you know, I don't believe in Joseph Smith if I don't follow the Heartland model. They get that all the time. Like, well,
Right.
you know, it's like, okay, I get, but again, like I said, I was a geologist, had to deal with evolution anyway, long ago. So I've dealt with people not agreeing with me in the church.
And also, as I've looked at some of the statements from Joseph, it almost seemed like he would accept probably anywhere in the Americas to support Book of Mormon geography, like you know, some of the ruins and things in Mesoamerica. I don't think he was exclusively just North America.
Yeah, and see, my approach is this. Like I said, I don't care what when I'm looking at the Book of Mormon, I look at the text first. I don't care what any general authority said about it.
Yeah.
Nothing personal, and they're nice people and inspired, but I don't. That's not what they're giving revelation on. So
Yeah,
and
a
then
lot of it's their speculation or theories or views. It's not.
yeah, and it's okay. It's okay. I don't mind it, but I don't like, you know, if I have some different opinion, I don't, you know, not go to the temple for 6 months or something because I, you know, I mean, it doesn't have anything to do with my faith, really.
Right. And those statements aren't binding either from them, you know, not clear.
Well, they are to some people. That's the thing. It's, you know,
yeah,
general authority Yahtzee or whatever. I mean, some people just. I remember sitting in a class at BYU, and it's like one guy was just citing out this general authority said this. I was like, okay, I got 17 general authorities take my position. You've only got 10. I win, you know. So, I mean, it's like they've said stuff all over time, some embarrassing things too. I mean, I don't, it's not like I'm not irreverent. I don't have respect for, believe me, I've been in leadership positions and he's not even in the church. I'm just saying, I heard anybody that's a bishop, I give them all the support I can, you know, that's just a tough job. And no, I don't really care what their Book of Mormon position is on geography. So I'm saying it's a different criteria, but I don't, when I'm doing my stuff, and even Joseph Smith, my approach, maybe it's different than others, but you know, he did say a prophet is a prophet when he speaks as a prophet, right? So
right.
when I look at it, I look at, and I don't get into a lot of the, you know, I have kind of my own thinking on the seer stone and stuff, but I don't. If he's describing something like the plates, or you know, there's some generic description, okay, I'm taking that as evidence, meaning somebody's describing something, and there's always, you know, maybe some difference of opinion, right? But so that's a fact. I'm looking more for facts, right? If somebody's going to say there's a revelation, I'm kind of saying, you know, it's got to be something that is a clear, and we'll talk about this with the Zelph, that somebody had a vision or something in relation, or some specific thing. Because they may comment on all kinds of things. The Kinderhook plates he commented on. He wasn't giving a translation, you know, or inspired translation. He just kind of had, you know, I mean, Don Bradley reviews all my books too.
And he has the explanation where he, you know, referred to most likely the Gale and compared a character on there, and it wasn't a divine translation,
right? He
just a secular looking at things.
Right. So I'm kind of like, I don't, and so the problem is like some people, even in their models, they will incorporate maybe something Joseph Smith said or Oliver Cowdery wrote, and they may have thought that, but unless it's there's some indication that somebody told them that, like an angel Moroni or something like that, that I don't necessarily, it's not like I ignore it, but I don't consider it as really factual that I can rely on for a scientific evaluation of something. Does that
Right.
make sense?
Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
Zelph, for example, Zelph does have, there was a vision of some sort. I mean, there's different, and we'll get into the different recountings, but so.
Yeah, that's interesting. We'll talk about that in a wee minute, because people always use Zelph to support the Heartland model. And whenever I look at your slide and you're actually, no, this doesn't support the Heartland model, I was like, huh? But we'll talk about that in a wee minute. Uh-huh.
Okay, there we go. Oops. Okay, so as I mentioned, we kind of went through the development of the model. It's not quite the level of Sorensen. Lacks, they don't have like military movements, and like Sorensen graphs out all the, the battle pathways through the cities on the East Sea, that kind of thing. Some of the proponents don't really endorse any city locations, so is variability. And again, it's hard to, I mean, they haven't really, there's been some books, so you say Rod Meldrum kind of supports this, but Wayne May, I don't know that he's come out with a very large book. He has a lot of presentations. So again, we mentioned the new Madrid. Here's like showing some of the other lower, like a 4 and that kind of thing, but you have to be above the 7. And it just doesn't get you where you need to go in terms of damage.
Are you saying it's only a 7, like right in the middle?
Yeah, so that'd
Here,
be
this
red here.
Pretty much just the center as well. And
yeah, so that's an 8. So that's really powerful. 7. This is enough to, you got to be above a 7 to get where you can just collapse primitive structures, right? And that's what's the Book of Mormon talks about, cities being destroyed or collapsed, And that's talking wood. I'm not saying they have to be like big structure. It's just primitive wood structures.
And you said again that a lot of the destruction, a lot of it happened in the land northward as well.
That's what the Book of Mormon says.
Book of Mormon says. So that even the New Madrid earthquake, even if the model was down here, would it still present a problem as it's only this small part that would be, a scale of 7?
And that's kind of what I was saying. If you have like land northward, a clear up here, and all, I mean, in my opinion, they may have some answer. I don't know. They basically you've got to have a smaller model,
right?
To accommodate the third,
a more limited geography.
Yeah, right. Well, and again, that's not even getting into travel distances. I don't know if they've even looked at those kinds of things. That's part of the problem. Is Sorensen goes through. He says, "Here's a travel distance from here, so many days." Land of Nephi, 11 days. The Helam got up to Zer. The Alma left to Zerhem, whatever. All those things, and so I don't really see anyone that's public. Maybe on some blog site, I don't know. I mean, but it's not in some discrete place where I can easily compile it and test against it. That's kind of what I was saying. The Sorensen model is done. He has Mormon's Codex and ancient setting, so you can easily see his maps. You can see in the text associated what he's doing, and he's got a few other publications. So I can go to one source and like you see Macinta, they also have a model, but again, it's somebody that's partly on the blog side, and so that becomes a little. Even in Mesoamerica, some of the models aren't very well developed. The alternate models. So I'm not criticizing Heartland that they're unique in that way, but it's just in order to test it, I have to be able to apply. And in this model, I can say they do have land northward, they do have land south, they do have some lands figured out, so you can actually apply the third Nephi to that, right?
But it would only be level 4 that would be like touching sort of like the land southward of their model, but it would need to be level 7 or above for the earthquake over the whole both land northward and southward, and that it wouldn't reach.
Right. Then here's another off the website, the Firm Foundation. So this is a different variation of the model, but you still have the same problem. This is where your new Madrid fault is. So it's actually, you got Zarahemla. See, Zarahemla is supposed to be in the land southward, right?
Okay. That's over here, like northwest.
Yeah, and then you've got Cumorah here, the land northwards. It's just hard to figure out how this really. I'm not talking. I mean, I'm not looking at that. Maybe they have explanations as to that, but I'm just saying you got land northward, land southward. This is your area of destruction.
Unless they've sort of like west is south and then east is north. Maybe they've done it that way.
Could. And again, if they have, there are variations in the Mesoamerican model. Some people say, well,
Yeah.
Sorensen has it, but there are explanations because it's clear that when they give south in the direction system is changing because they say southeast in the old world, but then they say south and then east and then north. I mean, something's happened once they get to the new world. They're describing the directions differently. So I'm okay.
Brandt as well talked about their perceptions as well.
I'm just saying
they would have perceived where they were.
That's in Mesoamerica. I'm just saying even the text shows you there's something changed. Like I'm not saying what it is. Yeah. So, but all I'm saying, so that's fine. Maybe they can come up with some explanation. But again, I don't have. Sorensen has a big discussion on directions in the back of his source book and things. As to different ways to interpret that. I don't have that. So maybe there is some explanation. So I'm not saying that. I'm not saying it can't be explained. Maybe they have an explanation. Just like you said, I don't know. But I'm just saying from a geologic standpoint, there's some problems with the model.
Okay.
At least the way it's laid out here. This is another one where they just kind of group everything. And then they use plains of the Nephites because I think in Science Camp, Joseph Smith said we're crossing the plains of the Nephites. But but again, was that some revelation he had as he was walking? It didn't say that. He just wrote it in a letter to Emma, I think, or something. So what I'm saying is Joseph Smith may have had opinions on geography. I look to see whether they actually seem to be revelatory, something from a revelation, recognizing that all prophets have opinions and things. And in a way, I don't know. I mean, I'm not interpreting that this is kind of their model again. So maybe they think that's a correct interpretation. But again, you have the same problem with the geology. You maybe have some up here in the land northward. Again, it's got Zarahemla and the land kind of smushed together. I don't know what the land northward is here, right?
Yeah.
Somewhere in here. So it's kind of hard. How do I analyze that? That's kind of the problem I'm talking.
So this is a separate, different map for Heartland.
Yes, right. So you can go on there. There's like a lot of different maps, and when you say Heartland, it's like, what is the Heartland? It's like you have Rod Meldrum and his group. Is that the Heartland, or are these other people that are thinking it's taking place? Because Rod Meldrum's a specific, company, right? And he does conferences, and he has his own books. Wayne May and Jonathan Neville, they go to those conferences. Like I say, I like them. They're nice people and good.
Yeah.
But it sounds like Wayne May, for example, isn't necessarily subscribing to Rod Meldrum's map.
Right.
Based on his comments. Jonathan Neville's kind of indicated he even has different concepts. So it's kind of like when you go to a conference, you're basically looking at Rod Meldrum material probably as your Heartland model, I would think, and so that's kind of why that last map I showed was off there. But these are other ones that have showed up too. And again, there's the same thing, but he's talking about the surrounding by water, its rivers, which I don't necessarily have any problem. I do think that could have been I do think that was part of the interpretation of the text, that maybe they're using a river. So, but again, it's, here's like another one, right? So I call this the Heartland, right? so people are using this Heartland. I mean, I don't think Rod Meldrum has like a copyright on Heartland. Maybe he does, but other people are using it to describe this Eastern. There are all these permutations, right? So,
right.
And I'm just saying that any of these permutations I'm looking at, they just don't. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying this guy is better than that one. I'm just saying none of them really meet the geological requirement. They all have too big.
Right.
Land northward, no method of destruction. And no mist of darkness that I can see that would explain, especially if you're talking this large of an area.
Gotcha.
And then this is something off of their website, so they're getting a little more detail here, right?
Yeah.
So they do zoom in, but it still
is this Rod Meldrum's website, or is this just
the Right, the Firm Foundation, whatever. But again, it's just kind of land southward, I guess, you know, I mean, you know, it doesn't say that on there, but these are all locations in the land southward. So I'm assuming that this is, so I don't know where their land northward is here. That's not telling me too much.
Right.
Okay, and I talk about the mists of darkness. The problem is the earthquake smogs from saturated soils. These only occur in the zone 7 area in short durations, right? So I just can't find any natural
It wouldn't
occurrence.
last the 3 days.
Only 3 days, and it's not large. It just that's too. It's small extent.
So it's not long enough and not large enough.
Yeah, and like I showed, I like this in the prior discussion of Mesoamerica, you have the San Martin. I've showed you where they actually documented that the ash, you know, I kind of had that ellipse drawn. All those were documented places where that eruption, the ash went there, you know, all over that area. So volcanoes, you have large amounts of ash, you know, so they can spread over a large distance, and they go high so they can spread, you know, and then they come down. And again, I'm not saying it has to be everywhere, because I recognize that it's only as good as their observations. But you know, when they say land northward, well, was it 2/3 of the land northward or half? I don't know. You know, I mean, there weren't populations probably in parts of the land northward to observe it. But but the problem is again, I'm not seeing where it can actually work under the geologic parameters. But they're, you know, maybe they have something different, and it'd be great if they kind of, you know, instead of kind of ad hominem or whatever, they just kind of explain how they can meet the geographic, you know, those parameters. And
Well,
maybe
yeah, because they need to. It needs to be confronted and dealt with. It's not not so much an attack on them personally, but it's something that might, you know, challenge their model. And they need to account for, you know, the things that happen in Third Nephi.
And it's kind of like, you know, they could say, well, you're preferentially Mesoamerica now, you know, whatever it was. I'm like, okay, consider my bias, but just these are the facts, you know, I'm just laying it out. So
yeah,
I'm hoping, I'm not saying anything that I think is not shown in the, you know, science, right? So and
okay, so you're gonna talk about the Zelph story, because a lot of people would quote the Zelph account that, you know, that this skeleton that was found, that Joseph's saying that this is Zelph the White Lamb. I know there's probably lots of different accounts, and Heartlanders would use this to support that the Book of Mormon happened in North America, not Mesoamerica. But you're making the argument that this actually doesn't support the Heartland theory, but actually invalidates it.
Yeah, I think it's a problem because, again, with the science, okay, and we'll go there, but so you've got, you know, the Zelph story, which a lot of people know. I don't have to recount it all, but basically, like you said, they ran across the Illinois River. There was a mound, and they went up, and
This was during Zion's camp, the expedition they're
and
traveling.
there's like 20 or so people. I can't remember exactly the number, but part of it is there are different accounts, right? There's like 7 different accounts of this vision. So I'm saying, yes, I think there's enough evidence by these people reciting that Joseph Smith had a vision and saw Zelph, you know, saw something, right? Now, there are different accounts of it over time. Some were contemporary with it. None of them are exactly the same. Some have contradictory details. I did not do this article. This is Kenneth Godfrey back in '89. You can look it up. He goes through, he actually has a chart, a table that has all the different points, you know, that were different in each of the accounts. And some of them.
And did they claim that Joseph saw this in vision? That was something I wasn't.
That's what was reported. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
reported. Yeah, by multiple of them. So
Okay.
right. So I'm saying, okay, I think that, you know, it's not like the repository recounting where some say it's a vision, some say it isn't. You know, I mean, this one seems like consistently they all do think it was a vision, and Joseph Smith said it was a vision. So
right, okay.
So you have multiple people, right, giving you the recount. So okay, and that's again the kind of the parameter I use. I don't just if something was in Times and Seasons that Joseph Smith published, you know, I mean, even the Mesoamerican people like, oh yeah, see that shows Joseph Smith. Like, well, I don't know. it may just have been his opinion of Mesoamerica too. It's not necessarily binding, right?
Right. Right.
So I'm just saying, okay, if I'm looking at something, if I'm going to look at it from a scientific standpoint, I need to know, to test it, I need to know it's actually a revelation of some sort, or it's part of the Book of Mormon or something like that. And anyway, so if you look through the summary, these are kind of the points that seem to be consistent with some of them were just silent on a certain point, but it does say there's an individual named Zelph. He was a warrior captain, a man of God, a prophet, a white Lamanite, whatever that means. He fought under Onondagas, and there's some spelling of Omendagas, so there's a little bit of spelling difference. There were great battles, at least that, and Zelph was killed by an arrow in battle. There is some that said, okay, battle among the Lamanites. Somebody later, like Wilford Woodruff, I think, added that it was like the last battle. So, but that seems like that's not really, that he's the outlier. So they kind of rely on that. Some people rely on that. I'm saying I don't see that as really part of the vision exactly. It seems to be added so late and only by one person, and it's conflicting the other people. So it seems to be battles among the Lamanites is what the more consistent theme is. And then it talks about Onondagas was known from the Rocky Mountains to the Atlantic Sea, or the Hill Cumorah. Some people have inserted Hill Cumorah, and that the mound was built by ancient inhabitants of this country. So that seems to be at least the main points of the vision that I'm, based on the recountings. So the differences related to Book of Mormon geography in the various accounts are 4 prior witnesses of the event do not indicate the nature of death other than by an arrow. They don't say anything about what kind of battle it was or anything. They just said he's killed by an arrow because they found an arrowhead, kind of in his back, kind of where the spine would be. I mean, we're adjacent to the spine. He also had a broken thigh bone that was healed, so that somebody said he got hit by a stone or something. And again, some of that maybe, I don't know that that's part of the vision that could have been added because they brought the bone back to camp and probably speculated about it or something.
Right. And stories can evolve as well.
Yeah. So again, but maybe it was, maybe that's part of the vision. It's not really relevant to kind of the test here, but, and then Heber C. Kimball, 9 years after the event. So the contemporary recounting was killed in battle, no specification. Heber C. Kimball in the last destruction among the Lamanites. I don't know what that, that's could be interpreted as the last battle, but it could just, it's kind of vague. So it could just be battles among the Lamanites, right? And then it was added, George A. Smith, 23 years after the event. So the last struggle when he's retelling it, so again, I think that would be the thing that probably push people to put it, say this is, a last struggle with the Nephites, would say that's got to be Book of Mormon lands, right? So,
right.
But I'm just saying I don't see that parameter really establishes that. Meaning, I'm trying to look at Joseph Smith's vision, what he actually, what the vision was really saying, and what other people may have just elaborated on their own. And then there was one account, Reuben Hancock said this land was called the land of desolation. That no other witnesses recounted that. And it may be that there's more than one, there could land of desolation. Desolation just means, Mormon said it was devoid of trees. So desolation in the Book of Mormon, there is a land of desolation, but it's possible it may be a different one. So I don't know that that's as definitive either, but
right.
But the actual vision is more consistent with what is known of the Hopewell. The Hopewell interaction sphere consists of these long distance sharing of certain artifact styles and raw materials. So they did have, it wasn't just one little, tribe here. There was a larger tribe. The mound builders, as we know, were spread. The center of the tradition is found in Ohio. That's where the bigger mounds and, more like serpentine, other larger mounds are found. And they found their items from all over the place, all the way from Yellowstone Park, obsidian, right? So I would say Joseph Smith's, his statement that Onondagas was known, and here's kind of showing, where things are coming from. So there was trade going on. And the archaeologists, again, I'm going with the science. So the archaeologists have indicated that the center's earthworks in Ohio were probably widely known. So, I mean, you could have had Onondagas there and be known, right? So I do think, Joseph Smith's statement about, it seems to be clear about this Onondagas being known from the East Sea to the Rocky Mountains actually seems to be credible. And they do kind of say that it didn't seem to be a trade network where it was like, okay, they take it from this location to this location, and those different people take it. They actually said it looks to be like a pilgrimage. So there were some pilgrimage going to Ohio, to this main Hopewell area. So yeah, that would make sense that he could have been known by a lot of people if he was a leader, right?
Right.
So I find Joseph Smith's vision consistent with what the Hopewell culture is talking about, that could have existed. Again, I'm looking at the science to say, yes, that matches the Hopewell. Again, that's supporting the Onondagas.
Okay.
Zelph, we don't know. I mean, Zelph, there's not, where am I going to find, anything about, because Onondagas, I have some parameter, right, that he's known from this far to this far. So I can look at the culture and say, Zelph, all the details, I don't really know. There's no way to really verify that. But the mound that Zelph was located at, it's called the Naples Russell Mound number 8 in Pike County, underwent an archaeological investigation. It was determined that that mound was constructed atop an earthen platform supported by 2 ramp log tombs. Now they weren't like digging up the Zelph. I mean, it's not like this is the Zelph skeleton. I mean, who knows? I mean, it looks like it didn't exist. They took parts of it back to their wagons. So,
Right.
And one person described him as not having any teeth, and so I'm like, well, they must have got the skull too. Who knows where it ended up? But and then I think Wilford Woodruff said he actually put the thigh bone in the wagon or something like that. But
so did they take the skeleton of Zelph, or did they just
they at least took portions? It looks like they took portions of it, and it seemed like, yeah, and they must have, they excavated enough to say they thought it was like this giant guy, because scout people, that's another thing I hear sometimes in these presentations. Hey, we found this skeleton that was 9 feet high, so it's the Jaredite, it's the proof of the Jaredites. It's like, well, in my books, it's like the Jaredite is not described that way. It's just because there were large copper breastplates, but that doesn't mean they were that just meant 2 people, and that was probably a sacred bundle anyway from the Jaredites. Probably, maybe the last battle with Coriantumr and Shiz or something. But so they described this skeleton as being very, like 8 feet, 9 feet tall, but that's because bones kind of skeletons spread a little bit when they, after they're deterred, meaning as the body decomposes, the joints don't stay together. You know what I'm saying? So
right.
So that's like a common thing that we dug up this 9-foot skeleton. It's like, well, he's probably like 5, 6, or 6 feet tall or something. And so anyway, but so that they did in this excavation, it was the last, because they do inter in these mounds. They're kind of like they're mortuary mounds, and they lay them out and then cover with dirt. They do dig some, burial pits, but the attempt here by the archaeologist was he found what would be considered the last interment. And that, so that skeleton, this QL 4904, was one of the last burials. And so that was radiometric dated to an average. They give a range, but they do give averages. So you have a range of this AD 580, 58 to 127, 2 sigmas. That's kind of your 95% probability. So that's what that 2 sigma means. It's just when they do analysis in the lab, that's the way they have to do that, because they have to count carbon 14s and stuff. So 91 AD was the average. What would be the projected date? But it's possible with 95% certainty it was within this range. Does that make sense what I'm saying? So
yeah, so when they dated, is it the mound, or is it the skeletons that were in the mound?
Yeah, it was the top skeleton in the mound, meaning they meaning you find the skeletons in chronological order in these mounds.
Right.
And
Okay, got you.
pits, if it's in a burial pit, then they still stack them. So this archaeologist says, here's the top one. I mean, the mounds, you have layers, you can do cross sections and show kind of the chronological. That's how this isn't unique. This is the way they did all their burial mounds, right? Of the woodland of the Hopewell. So he's saying, he's saying this is the most recent skeleton that was buried in that mound, right? So that gives you the date, the latest possible date that this mound was used as a mortuary, or was added to or used as the last person buried, right?
Right, and Zelph would have been one of the last people.
Right, they
dug down, if they saw it.
They dug down 2 feet, 1 foot to 2 feet to get to Zelph.
Right.
So he was buried. They did say there were other bones laying around, so there may be a few, but I'm just saying this. But you wouldn't expect, there wasn't a whole layer of, because you can get, coyotes or something digging up bones in these places. So it wasn't, but there wasn't like a whole nother mortuary layer on top of this, right? So, so again, and I'm kind of saying that this kind of established that this could not be Book of Mormon location, because in 91 AD, that's when there was no contention among all the people in all the land. You weren't having,
there was peace after the Savior came.
There were no battles. They didn't start till 321. In addition, there were no Lamanites of any kind. So
no manner of ites.
Yeah, so you can't say there's a battle even amongst the Lamanites, like they didn't exist. Zelph was described as a white Lamanite. Well, he wasn't during that time period. So that's the problem, is that the archaeological evidence is not supportive of that assertion that Zelph is part of the Book of Mormon land. That's kind of, meaning you kind of have the statement saying, oh, Joseph Smith maybe said it was the last battle, but that was added way late. And there's no evidence that the contemporary people said that. I mean, the contemporary reports did not say Joseph Smith saying that. So that was added way late. So what I'm saying is, based on that mound, that does not match. I mean, I'm taking Joseph Smith's vision at its, it was a vision. I'm saying it as a fact. Again, it's a question, the description is a little bit varied, right? And I'm saying it actually is consistent, meaning he said Zelph existed as a warrior at that time, and up there, and that it's not inconsistent with, if the Book of Mormon is in Mesoamerica, you could have, and we'll talk about that, Lamanites, could call them Lamanites up there, but they weren't part of the Book of Mormon's area description, right? Prior migration.
And there was also northward migrations that happened as well in the book.
Yeah, and I kind of mentioned that. Yeah, and also it's kind of the theme. You generally have, if layman just means unbelievers, you don't necessarily have to look for. I'm not. I don't. Some people are saying, there's kind of the Heartland hinterland, meaning they went up north. I'm saying I don't know that I see. I don't know if there's any archaeological evidence other than, like, the Hopi said that they came from Central America. The Hopi Indians, they're not the Hopewell, but they're in the West. I don't know that you have to show that this culture came from Central America or Mesoamerica. Meaning, I think Lamanite is kind of a term. And that's why when they went to preach to the Lamanites, I'm not saying that was incorrect. When they preached to the Lamanites,
in Missouri,
Missouri,
early revelations.
Right. And so, again, it's kind of like you have this description back in the Book of Mormon of Lamanites just being everybody else that didn't believe the way we believed. And there are multiple, like I said, I think there's different glyph forms. So you have the people of the Lamanites. There are different terms used to describe the Lamanite, the people of Nephi, right? In the Book of Mormon, there's different group descriptors. Some of them seem to be tribal, right? Maybe they did have that, and and Mormon said he was a pure Lehite, so it wasn't that they didn't necessarily track some descendancy,
Mm. I
but
believe as well. I can't remember the quotation in the Doctrine and Covenants, but the Lord, says for them to preach and convert the Lamanites, and it's either those who are Lamanites, who have descended from them, or those, by descent, who have become Lamanites. It's not necessarily a blood or descendant designation.
and it may be a blood from the original Lamanites who were just the unbelieving Central Americans. Meaning the classification could have been non-DNA, non-Middle Eastern people.
Right,
They were
right.
just unbelievers at the time of the Book of Mormon, and then those people descended from them. So does that make sense? I
Because
mean,
yeah, because some people would
so
say,
statements
okay,
of saying it's descended from the original Lamanites. I'm like, well, the original Lamanites probably had no DNA correlation anyway. So it's like you don't
and I
need.
know some people would say, oh, this is changing the narrative or shifting the goalpost. But even at this time, when there's no manner of ite, so like that they're all united, those that become Lamanites after would be those who, turn against the
Yeah.
Nephites and who are no longer believers. So it even at the end of the Book of Mormon, it's not a blood designation, Nephite or Lamanite, but it's kind of like, are you
Mhm.
following Christ or are you not?
Yeah. And then there's even like I wrote a part of my book is talking about the epistles. Just like one of the conundrums is like, well, it said they were all wicked, right? Mormon and Moroni were all wicked, and so I'm like, well, who is the epistle? Who is he talking to? I kind of suppose it's like a Lamanite group that's kind of incorporated in the Nephites. And then, well, after the battle, they were chasing down all those who wouldn't deny Christ. It's like, what are you talking about? If they're all wicked, who's believing in Christ? I kind of show that actually that's probably the corrupted church they talked about early that corrupted the sacrament, meaning so, and it was like they were swearing on the throne of God. So they were Christians, but they weren't Nephite, they weren't, Mormon Christianity. They were some pagan corrupted form, right? They were, because the Nephite, they were eating the daughters of the Lamanites and stuff like that, right? So
Yeah.
that's why I'm just saying these are the people. So it's not so this terminology of Lamanite, Nephite, all that, it's really probably dependent on the period of time. They were talking about is how they classified. They may have had a descendancy thing where, yes, kind of like, you're from Europe, so everybody's a nobility, right? They all have yeah, I descended from this king, even though it may, who knows how valid it is.
Yeah, and
Maybe not in Ireland, but Italy. It was like every house I go to, it's like, they have some title of, I'm like,
uh,
okay.
and I
They all
think
want to be
it's
nobility.
almost comparable, probably the Nephites and Lamanites, to like the Jew and Gentile designation. Pretty much anyone who's not a Nephite, anyone who's not a Jew, is a Gentile.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, I think there were different classifications depending on what was needed, right?
Right.
So, if you
Okay.
want to be important and establish street cred, you can, hey, it's like Amulek. That was interesting because, he comes in and he says, I'm a Nephite. Well, why is he saying that? He's not saying he's a Neph. He goes back. He's establishing that he's from the same religion, right? It's a Christian religion because Amaniah was in the Nephite polity, right? I mean, they obviously didn't give a crap about Alma being the chief judge. They were going to kill him or whatever.
Mm.
So, meaning you have to look at the context of when that term, how the term is being used. And I do actually, that's why I think there may be underlying glyph forms that are different. So a Nephite may be, there may be at times they're talking descendancy, other times
Like a blood
tribal.
Nephite.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. And it could be tribal, but it may not be DNA because maybe they accepted people into their tribe that were not, that, maybe it's, a cousin of somebody that intermarried. Yeah, you can come over.
Mm.
These familial groups, you marry into a family and I mean, I guess I'm saying there's all kinds of different permutations
Yeah,
to me.
I think I mentioned to you earlier. I believe it's in the book of Jacob. It talks about all those who are friendly to Nephi, were
Yeah.
called Nephites. you know?
Yeah. And he listed, like, and Jacob, whatever he lists, and they're the Lemuelites, blah, blah, blah. He goes, I'm just going to call them all Lamanites, because
Mhm.
he wasn't differentiating their tribes anymore. Why wasn't he? Because, well, they didn't care. They were just fighting whoever. They weren't fighting them in
Us
tribes. They were
versus them.
fighting them all as a group. So they were just like, I don't care. We don't, they're all just against us. So we're fighting them.
Yeah.
So I guess, and so when I'm looking at, people that are trying to tie too much in, like when Joseph says that they were mentioned to the Lamanites, I don't have any problem. Meaning that does not mean that they had to originate from Mesoamerica or something like that.
Right.
I think that's a general classification, and they could have had descendancy or just cultural links. But I guess I'm saying I'm not looking for the Hopewell to have been derived from Mesoamerica. There obviously
Right.
are influences that have been documented up that way. Corn spread that way, up northward into. So it's not like there were no connections, and there were some trade connections. Like I say, the Hopewell had a pretty big trading network. Who knows? I mean, they may have traded down into. There were trade routes up in the Rocky Mountains. There's turquoise from Western United States in Mesoamerica, so it was getting down there somehow. So there were trade,
So putting a fine point in this, so you're saying that the mound and the skeleton is dated to, what was it, roughly 80, 90 something in that time period when
91
there
average
was,
up to 157. And
if he was killed in battle, but then you say the Book of Mormon says that there was no battles, there was peace during that time, then you're saying that the Book of Mormon couldn't have happened in that location.
yeah, and then it does say that between 104 and 188 AD, it's kind of Fort Nephi. So, they give, and that's a whole nother thing I can explain to you, is why all the weird year counts are in Fort Nephi. They're actually matching intervals of sacred numbers in Mesoamerica. And that's what the Maya did in their codexes. But there, so you could say, well, the 157, maybe, he was at the latter end, but again, he's a righteous. Zelph was a righteous Lamanite.
Mm-hmm.
These are the Lamanites that broke off away from the church and weren't righteous. That's the first mention of Lamanites, when it started to split. First you had Lamanites split off, then you had these other churches. So again, you cannot have a righteous Lamanite during this time period. You can't have a Lamanite during most of it. And even if you're talking about the tail end, when they called themselves Lamanites, they were not righteous. Does that make sense?
And to put a fine point in this, how would you say this vision of Zelph and Zelph, being up here in this area, how does that fit with Mesoamerica?
Well, what I'm saying, well, it could fit it could be Baja. It's just basically saying the Book of Mormon wasn't taking place up there.
Okay.
And so Mesoamerica, it's consistent with the Mesoamerican model. And just like you said, there are migrations and other links up there. So maybe you would expect that. But I'm not
doesn't undermine. Okay.
Right. But I'm just saying it's actually more supportive of the Mesoamerican model than it is the Heartland model.
That's funny because it's always used to support Heartland, but you actually applying what archaeologists have done to the burial site and the skeletons there, actually it doesn't support the Book of Mormon happening in Heartland.
Yeah, and again,
that's quite sobering.
I'm not looking at it to Chris. I'm just saying that's what the archaeology says. That's what the mound says. That's the dating, the radiometric dating. I mean, again, some people in that group don't believe in radiometric dating.
Right.
So okay, what I'm just saying from my scientific standpoint, and maybe somebody can come back and maybe they can go back in the mound and get permission and maybe find some later date or something. But that's what the data shows right now. And the archaeologist said that was the latest burial, and that was the radiometric dating from it. Does that make sense? So
makes sense.
Is it absolute? Well, maybe with more data it can be disproven, but I'm just saying based on the data now, it's not consistent.
Yeah, and that's sort of like compounded then with what we were saying about the geology as well.
Yeah, again, kind of my bailiwick, if you will. I get into other things, but I do linguistics and scientific evaluations of the Book of Mormon to the extent, and this is a later vision by Joseph Smith, but it applies to the Book of Mormon. So that's kind of why I looked at it.
Right.
And I looked at this long ago. It's not like I just thought I've never published it, but I thought, while I'm talking about that model, this is another problem.
This is
Scientific
new to
problem
me.
with the model.
I've never seen anyone discuss it in this way before. Present this.
Yeah,
search.
I probably, but again, it's like, who cares about it? Who's going to bother to try to dig it? I mean, I actually got the report. The part of the problem was that the archaeologists that did it, I actually have a request into him for the original, but it did, and so his report didn't get into the it got into the literature just a couple of years ago. And it was an individual, an archaeologist, was actually taking the whole valley, trying to figure out the chronology of the civilization in that valley, meaning some of the mounds are younger and older, right? So he's trying to say, okay, he was just looking at urban settling. And so this report, it was done, and the guy had referenced it, but he hadn't published anything. So this person extracted from that and has cites him. So to be honest, this information wasn't like out there till a couple of years ago. So,
okay.
Let's maybe just do this real quickly.
Yeah, let's do it.
This is a quick one. Another scientific look is Mormons had statements of deforestation in the land northward. Brent Gardner talks about, well, it's the cement, and Teotihuacan. Dan Vogel says, no, that's too, kind of comments that's not the right time frame. Actually, so I looked at this, and Mormon describes it was desolate for timber, but not desolate for other vegetation, right?
Right, yes.
And it was in the land of desolation, land northward. So there are scientific techniques to determine events of ancient deforestation. You can look at soil loss, but one of the things is it wasn't total deforestation, it was just of the trees. There were some pollen studies done in what we call the land northward. They were trying to figure out when maize was domesticated. They took place in 2 locations in the land northward. They actually they confirmed what Mormons said, is at about 650 BC, because he said it was the people before that deforested the land, the Jaredites. And it shows a massive decrease in arboreal, tree-derived pollen only during that period, and it stayed that way. So, and that's what he said. He said the trees were gone. And so, again, that's totally consistent with, and probably they just stripped all the forest off because they needed to grow food, and that may be a cause for the Jaredite fighting each other, right? It's a resource issue. And I'm just showing that's the kind of the Jaredite area that's where the samples were taken. These are the core, these are the two, these are the core, the pollen cores. They take them out of like lake bed or marsh, so they can, they're different layers. So, and then the structural timber, the reason, they couldn't, the problem was, they said they couldn't build, they could only build like the houses. They couldn't build the large synagogues, that kind of thing. Well, the typical house, doesn't necessarily require tons of wood or whatever. The use of cement's documented in small, as a wattle and daub. So it says they built houses of cement. They didn't have to be huge. And for the larger construct, from an engineering, I'm also a civil engineer, is in Mesoamerica, in order to build the larger structures, because concrete, cement or stone, it doesn't have tensile, it has compaction strength, but not tensile. You have to have, they used hardwood trees to hold these corbel arches. I mean, they couldn't build the larger structures without the trees.
Oh.
So, yeah. And so what, anyway, and I'll just pop through it. People can read through, but again, it's another statement by Mormon. This is the death rituals, talked about buried weapons. Well, we find them in
Anti-Nephi Lehi.
Yep.
Carrying their weapons of war.
Yep. The interesting thing is, like, all of them did, even like the kids, right? And so it was only after a period of time that the stripling warriors could, and it was at the death of the king. I mean, that's, if you look at the time frame, it doesn't say that, but that's when the burial happened, after he died. And these burials, interesting, they have axes and they have pseudo weapons, just like a kid could put it in there. It was like a community burial, and they did it at the time when votive offerings. This particular one was, when associated with the burial of a king. So anyway, people can kind of maybe stop your presentation and read it, but
pause and read through that.
Yeah. Anyway, we won't go into the swords issue, but so that kind of, again, that's additional scientific stuff that that's kind of these things I get into, that pollen counts and that probably nobody looks at or cares about, but
Well, I find the comparisons of Teotihuacan to the land northward described in the Book of Mormon, buildings of cement and no timber, deforestation of timber, and being like a land of many waters, like it matches the geographical description actually quite well.
And I think
I find that really interesting.
Yeah, my difference was Brant was saying, well, they had to burn up all the trees, to make the cement. I'm just saying, I don't think that's really what's happening. I think the pollen counts show that they were stripping the trees in order to get more. They were basically slash and burning, right? That they were generating agricultural lands, and that's how most of the trees got eliminated. Cement, creation of cement could have occurred, but Teotihuacan, it's not necessarily that area. That's extremely to the land northward. Mormon just said it was there, and it's like, I'm just saying, showing, yes, you don't have to go clear to Teotihuacan. It's showing that down in the major parts of the land northward, like Camorra and all that, not clear to the extent of Teotihuacan, that the trees were gone, just dropped at 600 BC, and because the pollen count of the Heartlands just went to nothing. Now you still had all of the other agricultural plants growing, and there was plenty of pollen there. And that's kind of the premise is, why did the Jaredites have this civil war? Of course, Mormon, says they're all wicked, but it was also, they may have just ran out of resources, right? Meaning they had a large population, and they didn't have enough arable land to support it. And so what happens? You start fighting.
Yeah, that would make more logical sense as well, rather than people just hating each other. Right. And just want to wipe each other out, especially a war of like mass destruction, like that'll have a heavy blow on them.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm saying is it does explain, and it's partly the Olmec demise. It matches the Jaredite demise, and that was probably part of it too. Even archaeologists would say that there was some reason that the Olmecs go, and then there's evidence of a civil war among the Olmec at the end. They defaced monuments and all kinds of stuff. So, but again, it's kind of like, these are just scientific things that I work on that, objective, right? I'm just taking the text at its face and seeing if the science supports it. That's it.
Well, I appreciate that. That's what sort of I'm about. And I think we all want to try to, follow the best data and research and science there is. I think this has been a really good discussion, and you presenting geology and if it supports the Book of Mormon, looking at the Mesoamerica model in part 1, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes that we know happen in Mesoamerica, and then comparing it with geology and the Heartland model. And I think this has been a really important interview and discussion as well, and getting your expertise and diving more in depth. And also I hope that we can do maybe future interviews on different topics like the gold plates and the characters documents and other things as well. So everyone look out for more Jerry Grover, hopefully come back on the channel.
I did see somebody was writing a book on Nephites in Europe. So I wonder if they made it to Ireland.
Oh, I hope so. I'll create my own geography model in Ireland. No, land word up here, Belfast.
You could go out and dig yourself.
Yeah. And listeners, check out his book, Geology in the Book of Mormon. I'll put some links in as well if they want to dive deeper. But I think this has been actually quite a good deep dive for those people as well to probably get the gist of sort of like a lot of things you lay out in your book. And I've really appreciated the time and all the work you put into this. And
yeah, well, appreciate you doing a podcast. I mean, you're probably not in the like $1 million range of the monetization of YouTube, I'm assuming. So
definitely not. Definitely not.
It's probably a labor of love more than anything else.
Yeah, for the most part, yeah, pretty much. But no, I find it fascinating. I think these conversations are important, particularly talking, with experts in the field on this as well. I think it's important as people are trying to figure out, Book of Mormon historicity or whether they believe the geography might have happened, and to try to go like to the best resources, and people can do what they will with this podcast, this information.
And I hope they find it interesting. Like I say, I mean, I understand it's a little boring for some, but it's something that, you're not going to run into it. If you go to Deseret Book, you're not going to find very much of this stuff. Right?
Yeah. See, I find it interesting because, I've done a little bit of research into the geology and volcanic activity in Mesoamerica. And then there's a chapter in Brent Gardner's book where you reference you. So I was sort of interested to go a little bit deeper. And a lot of my audience are people who tend to like to go into the weeds on things as well. So I'm sure they'll enjoy this.
Yeah. And like I mentioned kind of off camera, it's like people ask me, kind of in mocking am I going to get a burning in my bosom when I read your books? And I just tell them, no, just a burning of your eyes.
A pain in your head, a headache.
Yeah, there's no emotional appeal. It's just kind of facts and science, right? So
yeah, I think that's part of part of this as well. I think an important part of seeking truth, even in sort of the church lens, looking at the scriptures, by going to the best books and seeking out the best scholars and best resources as well, reason and faith as well, as you're approaching it.
I'm not sure I classify myself as the best resource yet, but it's okay.
Well, probably when it comes to geology in the Book of Mormon, you're probably one of the best.
Okay.
Expert in geology anyway. Yeah, thanks so much for doing this interview with me, Jerry. And listeners who have watched this, if you've enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any future content. I hope you continue to do interviews with different scholars on different topics. And comment underneath any thoughts that you might have or any questions that you might have. And go check out Jerry's books and his website as well if you want to read more about it. And we'll see you soon on Mormonism with the Murph. Take care. Thanks, Jerry.
Yep.
Thanks everyone for watching this episode. If you've enjoyed it, please give it a like, share it with others who might benefit, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future content. You can also listen to these episodes on podcast form on Anchor or Spotify, and you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Check out my website for more content, personal blog, and more. And if you care to donate to support me, you can via my PayPal or Patreon, or through the website. And you can also give donations via YouTube through Super Chats. Thanks for watching Mormonism with the Murph. Take care. Bye-bye.